What's going on, everybody? We are back with episode 2 of the full podcast. Now, again, as before, like I said, I will break each of these segments down for you. If you don't want to listen to this entire thing, please go ahead and just jump over there now if that's what you prefer, to watch segments in your own time. But if you're here for the podcast, that's what this is. And today, we actually have a lot of audience interaction, or at least I'm hoping it will be. So we're going to go through a segment that has finished the sentence, and I'll put a poll on YouTube for you guys to be able to reply on that one. The second segment is going to be focused a little bit on something that I'm calling son of a batch. And I'll get into that a little more, but I'm a little annoyed at myself, a little annoyed at some distilleries. So give that away a little. And the last segment is going to be focused on something that I plan on doing this fall and participating in a blending competition. And I really want to put out there and get some feedback from you guys on what you would think might be the best way to go. Some of you might be familiar with this competition. Let's not talk about that just yet. Let's jump right into the first topic. All right, let's kick off today with a segment I'm calling Finish the Sentence. And you guys know I'm adding some new segments to the show and whatnot, so I'm not going to try to overwhelm you guys a ton. There'll be some that are just unnamed. It is what it is. But this one really came to mind this past Friday night when some friends and I were out celebrating another friend's birthday at one of the newer whiskey spots that's open. It happens to be a cigar bar as well in Sarasota. This place also has a location in Tampa, so we're familiar with it. We know the general manager. And so obviously we knew there'd be a few bugs. It's only been open a week, and it is what it is. But they have a wonderful selection of whiskey. And of course, those that enjoyed cigars had a wonderful selection of cigars. So it was a very fun night regardless, because we're there for a friend. And whenever you're out socially, even if it's not your cup of tea, you know, you always tend to enjoy it just because you're with buddies and you know, couples and people that you know and things like that. But that really got my mind going, in all honesty, as to we all have a certain universe of places around us that have whiskey selection. So you're kind of limited in a certain respect. But most everyone that lives, you know, in a decently populated area has a few choices at minimum where they could choose to go and drink whiskey. So with that said, it got me wondering, what is the one thing that maybe you weigh out when it comes to, you know, where it is you enjoy drinking whiskey? Or maybe said a different way, I'm most attracted to whiskey bars that, and then that has a nice blank line behind it, right? So when I stop and think about it, there's a kind of a myriad of places here in Tampa, St. Pete, Sarasota, right? We have the high-end bourbon bar. We have that's really a bourbon bar with or without food. We have both options. We have the kind of lower end, you know, food establishments that have a decent whiskey selection, barbecue places, things of that nature, which is one of my favorites, by the way. And we kind of have everything in between. As I just mentioned, we have a cigar bar that's has a wonderful bourbon selection as well. So you kind of have any number of other side treatments. You also have those places that are very cocktail focused that happen to have, you know, a ton of good whiskey, because obviously those two go hand in hand. But there's a lot of things that are kind of just factors in that. So I don't want to necessarily pin it down to like one style of restaurant, if you will. I wanted to get a little deeper in that. So I'm going to post a poll up on YouTube immediately following the posting of this video. And you're going to see in that statement that I made just a minute ago. I'm most attracted to whiskey bars that. And I'm going to list a number of options below that poll. I'll also have an other in case your option's not there. But those options will be something like the selection is wide, you know, the widest selection available, if you will. The selection of allocated is really big and available. There's a lot of barrel picks. Maybe the place does a lot of barrel picks and so has a lot of unique product. Great food. Maybe you are going out and it's a night out, a dinner out for you, or whatever the case is. Maybe the place has great events. And so when you go, there's tasting events, they have distillery reps, they always have things that are new to you and you can learn something. Could also just simply come down to price, because in all honesty, it's a reality for most of us, probably all of us, but at some point it's a reality for at least most of us. So I really want you guys to go ahead and answer that. Again, there'll be an other at the bottom as well, where you could type a comment underneath the poll if your particular, what is it that attracts you to a bourbon establishment, you know, isn't quite there, a whiskey establishment, if you will. I'd really love to have your participation in this, because I'm really interested in this topic and seeing where everyone in terms of my viewership, my audience feels about this. We'll recap the results in a future episode, probably in the intro segment, so it doesn't creep into one of the other segments. You guys don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. But I'll tell you how I feel once all the results are in, because I don't want to jade your vote here. All right, y'all. So I've got to tell you, I'm a little annoyed. Two ways. A little annoyed with myself. I'll get into that in a minute. I'm a little annoyed at some distilleries. And I really, really mean this. I'm not being funny. Let me cleverly annoy with myself first, because the distillery portion of this is the one that I don't have any control over. But the annoying at myself, I can absolutely come back on. So over the Memorial Day holiday, we had some friends over, pool day, whatnot. One of my friends happened to bring his bottle of Willet 8-Year Wheated. Now, you guys have heard me many times. You're probably so tired of hearing about this bottle. I completely understand that. Maybe you're annoyed at me. That's fine. I can live with that. I get it. I honestly just don't believe it supports that $230 plus MSRP. Our bottle was very trail mixy, earthy, not off flavored, just not what I expected, in all honesty. And my friend looks at me and he goes, I don't understand your dislike for this bottle. So he brought his. We did a flat side by side, right? Now, mind you, I want to, before we go into what the results of that side by side were, I want you all to remember this was batched from the same season of distilling, same batch of barrels. I don't know about same. I think the way they describe it is it's vague, but it seems like it's all from one distillation season and they all bottled it at one time. So doesn't mean they bottled everything at one time. There could be some batching and things that go on that. So that'll be important later, but just setting the stage for you. So where we got to is put these things side by side. And my bottle, as I obviously have said in the past, gave you the notes a minute ago, versus his bottle that had all these beautiful dark chocolate notes in it and some other little pops of fruit sweetness and other things. And I just said, no way. No way. This is annoying. I am annoyed at myself for one reason. And that is because I think when we sit down and we drink something and we're led to any sort of notes, whether it be from breaking bourbon or the distillery itself, which is important for the reason why I'm annoyed at distilleries. We'll get to that in a minute. We often forget that this is not a perfect game. You can't simply reproduce something at any sort of smaller scale, small batch, right? Which there's no true definition of small batch. We know that. You can't truly get something to be equal, even within its own season. And when we get to the distilleries in a second, I have a couple better examples. But in this example, I'm annoyed at myself because I think I have to remember to come back and say, is this something where there could be batch differences? Now, a second example of this I can point you guys to is definitely this year's Midwinter Night's Dram. If you aren't familiar with how they do that, they do Act and Scene. So Act is the year, the 10th year of the release. This year was Act 10. And Scene is the day of the bottling, which they only have so much capacity in their tank to put in, and they bottle that off and whatnot. So there was variance from bottle to bottle there, and that's the exact same situation essentially as the Willet 8-Year. So I have to keep reminding myself that my experience with that bottle, and I need to throw in caveats for you guys because you're probably sitting there saying like, well, duh, Nate, that makes sense. But I don't think a lot of people actually stop and think about that. So I'm annoyed with myself. I got that off my chest. I feel better, but I am still annoyed a little more at some distilleries. Here's why. Because I don't think they recognize that either. I don't think there's enough recognition on their part where they go out and they say, hey, this is what we get. This is how we do it. I won't call everyone out. I don't look at every website or everything like that, but I did look at a few that I went back to and could attest to. And honestly, if I were looking at the website and expecting a certain experience and I didn't get it, I'd wonder what the heck is going on. Now, that's not saying my palate is as good as a master distiller. So when we get down to nuanced flavors and things like that, certainly understandable. But if it's just way off from what they're explaining, it's kind of a little disingenuous to me. Now, will they do anything about it? That's for another day. My suspicion is no. But the first one that I want to go into on this is the one you saw last week. Good old Calumet 16, right? So we brought this one up last week. I did the second look at it on second thought, if you will, and still wasn't my cup of tea. If I were to go back and say, was it better than the first experience? Yeah, I told you guys it was slightly better than the first experience from what I remember. But when I pull up the website for the tasting notes here, my experience does not greatly align with the experience that is described on the website. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. Again, one, we have micro batching going on here within the same season. So they take a full rack of whiskey and they blend it and they bottle it and ship it. They do that over and over again for all their 16-year-old product. They did it for the 15-year, they did it for the 14-year. So you're definitely gonna have some variance. But for me, it seems a little disingenuous to put one description out there and not note clearly like your experience may vary. I do believe it talks about how they're single rack black, but I don't think many consumers stop and think about that and say, well, that just means there's gonna be batch variance, right? So a little tough situation. I think we're probably crying, I'm probably crying about this and it's not a big deal. The other thing that comes up with whiskey a lot, and I see this more of the kind of cognitive dissonance that might come up for a lot of people versus the micro single season blending differences, which is one issue, is those that have an annual release or a semi-annual release, a spring fall release. And I'm talking about a product like Willett Family Reserve Rye. So when you go to Willett's website, they describe this product and they have a list of descriptors. And I can honestly tell you, James and I recorded an episode a few months back, had 3 different varieties, and only one of those was even remotely close to what the descriptor is on their website. So do I think most people are going to the websites to get their tasting notes? Probably not. But the fact that it's out there is honestly something that I think we need to really think about and possibly look at to our distilleries to say, hey, maybe you want to give us a little more variance. If you're not going to give us each individual batch notes, which I think is unrealistic. So I don't know. I'm only putting it out there because I think someone will be like, well, why couldn't they just give us batch notes? I mean, like in the case of the Willett Family Estate Rye, I mean, that's not a spring fall release. They're releasing that rolling 90 days. Like it could be 4, 5, 6 releases in a year or more when you think about the volume they're doing. So that's not really going to be a great solution because they're just simply not going to take that time to do that. And I don't blame them, to be honest with you. But I tried to think of good examples that we could, have be akin to this with anything else. Like I think back to my craft beer days, and you hear some variants and things like that. And certainly understandable because we are humans making this process. There's a lot of computer automation and testing and things that go into it in labs that you could try to get as close. But at the end of the day, there are other variables you simply can't control. So I just want to say, like, at the end of this thing that, me having this kind of, I won't call it epiphany because I knew this in the background. So I'm more annoyed at myself, like I said at the top, for not really being cognitively aware enough to be like, hey guys, this is something that we need to consider when I pan this bottle or not. Which, by the way, neither one of these bottles, based off the experience, would I purchase, to be very honest with you. You guys already know about the Calumet 16 based off that experience. I just was underwhelmed. I thought it was a solid product, but not great for the $140-ish price tag on it. This Willett Family Estate Rye, if you hear things people say about Family Estate Rye, they love it for the most part. And honestly, I would not have bought it based off this experience. It's just not up to par with what even their description of it is. So that said, I think most of us are probably going to either friend recommendations, YouTube people recommendations, whiskey tubers, if you will, or like a place like Breaking Bourbon that we know just does high volume. There's a trustworthiness factor. Of course, some people probably still use Thrillist and stuff, but whatever, hey, whatever floats your boat. At the end of the day, I don't know that anything can be done about this, but I just know that my takeaway for this is to try to remember to remind everyone when I do a review or the review is placed on this channel or anything that comes up that has to do with a review or a critique of a bourbon, I'm going to try to really make sure I verbalize and say, hey, this is a batch product within a single season, so we should expect hopefully smaller variants or not. But at the same time, I'm going to try and keep that in my mind. And for the last segment, I'm going to need your help, so hang in there because I want to ask you guys a few questions and see if we can give me some comments back on this in this video. Be right back. All right, now I need your help. Seriously, I do. I am wanting to enter this year's Blendageddon, put on by Mash and Drum Jason C. However, I've never actually really done anything blending wise. I don't know if any of you have dabbled blending at all either. That's okay, because I think that's what's going to kind of make this fun, to be honest with you, is to get some feedback and understand. I have a thesis and idea on how I want to go about this. I have watched a lot of the last 2 seasons of it, so I kind of have some ideas as to what is popular, what plays with Jason's mind, what actually plays in some of his guest judges' minds in terms of balance, sweetness, barrel. There's a little dusty qualities in there they tend to enjoy. Obviously, there's certain flavors they'd stay away from. But that said, even some of those ones that they tend to say stay away from, if they're blended in and done well, they tend to say, hey, it still works. It's just not my jam, but it works. My thesis on this, and I want to get your thought processes and see where it is. I want to take an already established bottle that would be relatively easy to get a hold of and build around that. Because I see a lot of the blends, there's kind of 2 schools of thought, it seems like. Seems like there's one school of thought that says, I'm going to take an amalgamation of like 8 or 9 different things and see how that kind of all fits together. Or I'm going to take 1 or 2 core pieces and kind of build from there. So my thought process was starting with like a canvas, like a rare breed from Wild Turkey. Now this is a newer bottle. I do have an older bottle I may subject to this potentially. If I want to go with that dusty component, I'm not entirely sure. Also something like 1792 foolproof, potentially. You end up getting back to some of these products that have already some proof to them, is my point to start with, because you're probably going to be playing around and diluting it down no matter what. I mean, unless you're going to go all gas, which could work, I guess, but I don't know. But I tend to think that I want to surround this with something that complements all of it. So that's going to be the really hard part. I don't even know if this is of an interesting topic to any of you, but I'd really, really love to hear your feedback on this, because my thought process was it'd be a fun idea to do something like all the animals or something, right? If you could find a way to also tie it together and make it a little more interesting like that. So my idea with that is like take Buffalo Trace, Wild Turkey, and think of any other animal type product you could put in there and pull that together. I don't know. It's kind of kitschy. It's kind of different, but what I really think I may be doing is putting together like a small focus group on this. So if that's something that you're interested in, I would absolutely please ask that you just in the comments below be like, hey, Nate, interested. And I'll reply with the channel email address and have you send me a quick inquiry so we can maybe talk about that a little bit offline. But the contest is in September. So I think submissions typically open in August. So we have about 8 weeks here before everything has to be together. So it happened pretty fast. So if that's something that you're interested in helping out with potentially, I would really love that and appreciate anything that you guys would like to do. It could potentially involve a sampling panel where we do samples together of a blend or 3 or 4. I don't know about that yet, but it is what it is. It could just be even just a brainstorming session like, wow, I really love the flavors from this and the flavors from that. I always wonder what would happen if we started there and put those 2 together and then you built around it. I don't know where this is going to go. Really just an open call for some thought processes and help at the end of the day, and just seeing where that goes. Seeing if any of you have experience even just playing around with blending. It's probably something that I think at the end of the night we all do. If you had 2 or 3 glasses from your tasting, you're like, let me dump this and this. And it wasn't anything done purposefully in most cases, but maybe you have. So if you do have some experience with that, I'd love to chat with you even more. I can't thank you guys enough for watching today. I hope you enjoyed this content. I'm going to link some other content above. And until next time, cheers.